everyone. Delighted to be joined today by Danny Crates. Danny and I have been speaking throughout the last year of the pandemic, and I think kind of it was a good time to catch up with him and see how it's been going for him and how, I suppose, life has changed, kind of moving from the physical stage to the virtual stage, and how he's reacted and where he's at. So how's it been? How's the journey been over the last 14 months or so now?
It was on Friday the 13th. I was driving home from a live event, and it had already been announced what was coming. And I was driving home Friday the 13th of March. This is last year. And we'd done a big live event that day for Heathrow Airport, actually. And I was driving home, and then it just hit me like a brick. I was like, I work in events, and this is going to be tough. I never imagined a year. So immediate, and I've never had my phone ring so many times from clients as I did in that first week. I mean, if they were all bookings, it would have been brilliant. But of course, they were either postponements or cancellations. Yeah. And of course, and that's where, as a business, as a person, you have to be respectful as well. And it was like wavering the booking fees sometimes as well, the holding fees, because it's out of their control as well. And it's just like, for me, it was okay. Let's just work on the fact that I'll do the right thing by the business. I'll say, look, let's just reconnect once we can again. But it was just cancellation after cancellation after cancellation. And of course, in the early days, we thought this would be a short journey we'd go on and the world would pick up again. But then it changed, and I went through a process of going out to businesses and doing everything virtually, changing the presentation so it could be adapted to deliver it virtually. And letting businesses know that I was all set up, built this studio in the garden. It's a soundproof studio, so I can deliver. It's got lighting in here, soundproofing. But of course, in the early days, businesses weren't interested. They were surviving. They weren't about thriving. They just had to survive, so they weren't engaging. It's changing a little bit now, and I've really seen in the last 6 to 8 weeks a big uptake in terms of virtual delivery to big clients as well around the world. They're starting to realize that you can actually bring in a bigger audience. It affects fees and it affects other aspects of it, but they're seeing the potential of what we can deliver. But of course, you still lose when you're doing the big groups and it's over a screen. It still takes a lot to get used to looking at yourself, talking to yourself on a screen, on a webinar. And I changed my mindset recently, and it was a business that, it's a small business. They wouldn't normally be able to have me as a keynote speaker at an event. And I actually changed my mindset, and I came to an agreement with them that I'll do a session for them, because they all work together, and it was a small group of 16 because they worked together and they had a big enough space at the end of the day. They was having like a quarterly strategic meeting. They was in one room, all distanced out, all with masks on. It was crazy to see. But for the first time in a year, I had people looking at me on one screen, and I could actually see, because they could have their mic on, because it wasn't hundreds of people that was going to interfere with it. I could hear them interact with the presentation as I was doing it. Like, my presentation is about the gasps, the laughs, the ahs, the ahs, and I could actually hear it. And then when I did Q&A at the end, it wasn't in a chat box. People put their hand up and they stood up and they asked me a question. And I can't explain to you how emotional that felt. It sounds really stupid, but that's what we live for, right?
I tell a story in my book about, in my early days, about how I spoke to a very successful athlete, and I couldn't understand why they did the speaking, because they got really nervous beforehand. And they said the reason they loved the live speaking was because of their reaction from the audience. It was the closest they got to that start line at the Olympics or whatever it was. Is that what you feel, and are you missing it? And do you get it at all from the virtual?
In a different way from the virtual. So I miss that massively. And when we talk about nerves, it's very different nerves to being on a start line, because on a start line, it's more about, this is your one chance. If it's a Paralympic or Olympic final, this is your one chance. And if you did an individual sport like me, it's all on you, right? There is no fallback. You can't have a 99% day and still win. You've got to have a 100% day. So everything. So that's where the nerves and the pressure for that comes. For speaking, it's about perfection. It's about delivering what the client wants. It's about not making mistakes throughout a presentation. So, my presentation is very, it's been built over a number of years and changed and tweaked. It's just about getting everything right, the EAV working properly. That's where the nerves come from. And the key moments, knowing or hoping that they're going to land, just like a comedian really, wants to make sure that the punchline of a joke works. We have our punchlines in our presentations, the big moments that, the people go, that's how I translate that into my world. Those moments that, and those are the moments that you can get nervous about because you want them to land. And it's also the biggest, for me, the biggest one is you have no idea what people are feeling because you can't see them, especially on the big webinar ones. So you are just talking to yourself and trying to keep your energy level the way you would on stage. That's like the difficulties that I've found is, I haven't found it difficult to do, but the things I've had to be mindful of is especially energy.
You've been through steps of your life where you've had to kind of make transitions and kind of adapt yourself. Do you think that helped you kind of quickly realise that you had to move into the virtual environment, or were you on the same playing field as us regular folk?
One of the big translations that you can take from sport into business is our ability to adapt and change. We have to constantly be prepared. I talk about stepping outside your comfort zone. The only way you step outside your comfort zone is if you're prepared to do something slightly different. It's not always about working harder. It's about changing the way you do it or training smarter in athletics terms. You can't just physically run harder in training. Sometimes you've got to train smarter.
Yeah.
So we always have that ability, and successful people in sport used to dealing with setbacks. No one's had an easy journey. Business is no different. Like successful people in business, to get to the top, it's never going to be easy. You've dealt with the setbacks. So when this comes along, yes, we're equipped better to just understand that change happens, right? And if you want to be successful, you have to adapt to change. But where I think it can be potentially negative for someone in sport, and I found it quite difficult, is in my sporting career, I have a massive element of control, right? So me and my coach make choices about what I'm going to do and the path I'm going to take and any kind of change we're going to put in place. Whereas this, I made a choice to adapt to my presentation, so to not expect to be able to deliver the same way I would deliver, and that was done through practice and gaining an understanding of what works better for the virtual world, understanding that I needed a space to do it, so having to create this space that I can do it from. So yeah, it's not a perfect studio. But it's better than me being indoors when there's other people around. So I have this space to concentrate and focus, and it's almost like stepping onto stage for me. But what's out of my control is the client, right? So what I couldn't almost get my head around the fact is, for me, engaging your employees, engaging your teams, motivating, inspiring people, giving people tools to be resilient and deal with change. There was never a better time to do it than there was or is during this current situation. People needed that. But of course, what was out of my control was the fact that while I would be speaking to businesses, say, this is the time that you really need, you've got people at home working from home and they're struggling, and we have tools and things they can use to help them and translate things into their world that they can improve the way they're working and their mental health and their well-being. But of course, businesses weren't interested in that because they're a business and they're actually trying to get through it themselves. That was a bit that was out of my control. And I think that's the bit I found almost difficult, because I was used to being in control as an athlete. We do control the controllable. So as an athlete, I can't control what other athletes do in a race, but I can control my preparation. So I couldn't, I could control how I reacted to the current situation in my working world, but I couldn't control what was going on with the corporate world, which is, their minds are not on bringing in a keynote speaker for a conference.
But do you think their mindset has now changed, and actually businesses are looking forward and actually starting to think strategically then, rather than just focusing on the moment that we've been in?
I think massively. I think businesses have now, as it's gone on a lot longer, they've realised that they are now bringing. They've always been having the Zoom meetings and the Teams meetings, and because they've had to, it's the only way they can stay connected. But rather than it just being a weekly catch up, a daily catch up, whatever they are, a team meeting, now bringing some emphasis back into it again. So having an element that might be outside the business but is connected to it in the messaging. I think they've started to see that. I think they've started to see that the world is going to open up no matter what, because it has to. We don't know exactly how it's going to open up and what it's going to look like. I think they've also seen that potentially that this is a way forward to deliver a message and to run conferences. I think businesses have also woken up. Why do we need to fly somebody to America to have a meeting for an hour? We can do it over Zoom. Why do we need to fly people from all over the world to have a conference? We can do it over Zoom. Of course, you still need connectivity, and there's still times when you need it. But I think they're just starting to realize now that we actually do need to re-engage with people, because we're preparing them to come back into the new way of working, whatever that's going to look like, and the world opening up again. And now is the time to start really working with their employees so they do come back. And I equate it to no different what we've been through now to as a track athlete, where when we get injured as athletes or sports people, we don't just sit back and wait till we're ready to run again. So my biggest injury time was 5 months in the Beijing build-up, but I couldn't just go to the physio once a week for 5 months, do nothing else, and then expect to pick up where I left off. I had to do everything I could to prepare, ready for when I could run again. So that's what I equate this to. Businesses have to do everything they can to prepare for people to go back into, not that they're not working now, but a new way of working where they will be starting to engage with people again, going back out for salespeople on the road, going back into offices, doing the commute again. It might not be every day, but it'll be some days. So you have to start preparing people. You can't expect them to come back and pick up where they left off a year ago, dust the dust off the desk and just pick up again, because you've actually got to start giving people something. And motivation and inspiration is a big one as well for people, right? People are struggling. And it's not just about motivating them to do stuff. It's about showing them how you can do things slightly differently, how you can take control of a situation. So we can't control COVID, but what we can control is our reaction to it.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic speaking to you. Really appreciate it. Some great insights there. So
thank you.